December 1944. The Ardennes Forest. Snow covered the land in silence. The pines stood heavy with frost, their branches bending under winter's weight. The world was quiet, too quiet. Back home, many believed the war was nearly over. Paris was free. The Allies were pushing into Germany. Christmas was near. Young soldiers wrote letters promising they'd be home by New Year's. But Adolf Hitler had one last gamble, a desperate strike he believed could turn the tide. He called it Operation Watch on the Rhine. His plan was bold, savage, to split the Allies apart, to drive a wedge through the Ardennes, to seize Antwerp, and force the world to its knees. And so, on the morning of December 16th, the quiet woods erupted. More than 1,000 German guns opened fire. The sky thundered, the ground shook. The snow itself rose into the air as shells tore the forest apart. Men clung to the earth, their hearts pounding, wondering if this was the end. For those on the line, it felt as though the world was ending. Through the fog came tanks, the panzers, black crosses painted on steel. Their engines growled like beasts. Behind them marched the Wehrmacht, disciplined, relentless, certain of victory. The Germans believed it would be easy, that Americans, cold, hungry, and green, would scatter, would surrender. But they were wrong. In frozen foxholes, with frost-bitten fingers wrapped around rifles, the Americans stood. At Elsenborn Ridge, the 99th and 2nd Infantry Divisions fought with a fury that defied belief. Outnumbered, outgunned, freezing in the snow, yet unbroken. The Germans were stunned, stunned that the line did not break. Stunned that boys barely 19 years old held fast against veteran soldiers of the Reich. It was not numbers. It was not brilliance of strategy. It was grit, the unyielding spirit of ordinary men. The German attack rolled westward like a steel tide. Villages burned, roads filled with refugees, and in the middle of it all stood the small town of Bastogne. Bastogne was no great city, just a crossroads, but in war, crossroads mean everything. Whoever held it held the roads. Whoever lost it lost the battle. And so the Germans closed in. 7 roads converged on that town, and Hitler's armies were determined to seize it. Standing in their way was the 101st Airborne Division. Paratroopers, men forged in Normandy, men hardened in Holland, and now men stranded in the snow. The 101st had no winter uniforms. Ammunition was short. Medical supplies dwindled. The sky was gray, denying them resupply from the air. They were cut off, surrounded. And yet, they refused to yield. The German commander demanded surrender. He sent word to General Anthony McAuliffe, expecting him to bow. McAuliffe's reply was one word: nuts. The message was carried back to the Germans. They read it, confused, insulted, but the meaning was clear. The Americans would not surrender. Imagine it, an army surrounded by tanks, artillery, seasoned troops, replying with a single word of defiance: no surrender, no retreat. So the battle raged. The 101st fought street by street, foxhole by foxhole. Wounded men shivered in cellars as medics worked by candlelight. The snow was stained red. Every shell that fell shook the earth. And still the Americans held. The Germans were stunned, stunned that their armor could not break through, stunned that surrounded men could fight like lions in the snow. Word spread across the lines: Bastogne still holds. And in that frozen winter, Bastogne became more than a town. It became a symbol, a beacon of American defiance. For the soldiers, it was not about glory. It was survival. It was brotherhood. Sharing rations, huddling for warmth, watching over one another through the longest nights. And for each man, it was the knowledge that if Bastogne fell, so too might the entire line. But it did not fall. Bastogne still held, but the situation was desperate. Ammunition ran low. Food was scarce. Wounded men lay in barns and basements, their breath fogging in the frozen air. The sky remained overcast, grounding Allied planes. The men of the 101st fought on, but the noose tightened with each passing day. And then a voice rose above the storm: General George S. Patton. His Third Army was south of the Ardennes, already engaged in heavy fighting. But when the call came, Patton did the impossible. He turned his entire army, an army of tanks, trucks, artillery, and tens of thousands of men. In the dead of winter, on ice-slick roads, through impossible terrain, he wheeled them north toward Bastogne. It was a maneuver so daring, so swift, that even Eisenhower later admitted he thought it could not be done. But Patton made it happen. On December 23rd, the skies cleared. For the first time in days, Allied planes roared overhead. Cargo gliders swooped down, parachutes blossomed in the air, supplies tumbled from the sky, ammunition, food, medicine. The men cheered, their frozen hands raised toward heaven. Hope had returned. Then came the tanks. On December 26th, the lead elements of Patton's Third Army smashed into the German lines and reached Bastogne. The siege was broken.
For the Germans, it was a shock. They had counted on swift victory, on breaking the American spirit. Instead, they found themselves locked in a grinding battle, their timetable shattered. Every day Bastogne held was another day lost to Hitler's plan. Fuel depots ran dry, tanks stalled in the snow, the mighty push westward slowed, and then it stopped. The Bulge had begun to shrink. What stunned the Germans was not only Patton's speed, it was the resilience of the men they thought they had crushed. Surrounded, starving, bleeding in the snow, the Americans had endured. And in that endurance, the tide of the battle turned. The Ardennes would not be their breakthrough. It would be their undoing.
January 1945. The snow still lay heavy across the Ardennes. The forests that once echoed with the thunder of German tanks were now scarred with wreckage and silence. Hitler's gamble had failed. The German advance had pushed deep, 50 miles into Allied lines, creating the great bulge on the map. But now the bulge was shrinking. With Bastogne relieved, the Allies struck back. Patton's Third Army surged north. British forces under Montgomery pressed from the north. American divisions pushed from the west. The trap was closing. The German war machine was bleeding out. Their panzers sat silent, empty of fuel. Soldiers scavenged villages for food. Ammunition ran low. What was meant to be a decisive blow became a desperate struggle for survival. For the Americans, it was no easy victory. The Ardennes was a graveyard of men and machines. Bitter fighting raged in villages like Foy, Houffalize, and St. Vith. Every frozen field, every ridge was paid for in blood. And yet, the line never broke. By mid-January, the great offensive had collapsed. The Allies regained the ground they had lost. The bulge in the line was gone, and with it went Hitler's last hope of turning the war. The cost was staggering. Over 80,000 American casualties, dead, wounded, missing. The Germans lost even more. Men they could never replace. Tanks they could never rebuild. Fuel they could never recover. The Reich had thrown its last dice and lost. What remained was ruin. Frozen villages reduced to ash. Forests littered with broken steel. Soldiers, American and German alike, lying beneath the snow, their stories silenced forever. But in that terrible winter, the world saw something extraordinary. Ordinary men in extraordinary circumstances, had stood firm. Farm boys, factory workers, sons of America who refused to yield. And the Germans were stunned. Stunned not by numbers, not by weapons, but by the sheer, unbreakable will of the American soldier.
The Battle of the Bulge ended in January of 1945. Hitler's last gamble had failed. His armies shattered, his war doomed. But for the men who fought there, the memory never faded. The bitter cold, the frozen forests, the thunder of artillery echoing across the Ardennes, and the faces of brothers who did not return. History remembers it as one of the bloodiest battles ever fought by the United States Army. More than 80,000 American casualties. But history also remembers the courage, the grit, the refusal to surrender. The Germans were stunned that their lightning strike had been blunted, stunned that surrounded troops at Bastogne had stood unbroken, stunned that in the end the American spirit had held firm. The snow melted, the forests grew quiet again, but the echoes remain. Echoes of sacrifice, echoes of defiance, echoes of young men who became legends in the winter of 1944. If you've journeyed with me through this story, thank you. Stories like these remind us of the sacrifices made and the lessons history leaves behind. If you enjoyed this storytelling, please consider subscribing to my channel. It helps us keep these voices from the past alive. And don't forget to give this video a like if it moved you, if it made you pause and reflect. Your support means the world, and together we can keep history alive for generations to come. Until next time, stay curious, stay grateful, and never forget the echoes in the snow.